The young real estate agent assumed I was a desperate elderly widow who didn't understand property values. His condescending offer was about to backfire spectacularly when I revealed I'm the anonymous investor who owns most of his agency's best listings. Before we start, don't forget to like this video, comment where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this. Have you experienced something like this? Please let me know in the comments. My name is Mandy. I'm 65 years old, and I live in Orlando, Florida. And this is the story of how I taught a predatory real estate agent that underestimating an Italian widow with a low-cut dress and silver-streaked hair was the biggest mistake of his professional life. I had been thinking about downsizing for months. My husband Marco had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving me alone in our beautiful 4,200-square-foot home in one of Orlando's most prestigious neighborhoods. The house held so many memories, but at 65, I was finding it increasingly difficult to justify maintaining such a large property by myself. What I hadn't told anyone, not my neighbors, not my friends, not even my late husband's family, was exactly how successful my real estate investments had become over the past 30 years. While everyone saw me as Marco's widow, the woman who always wore elegant low-cut dresses that showed off my Italian heritage and natural confidence, they had no idea that I had quietly built one of the largest commercial real estate portfolios in Central Florida. I preferred it that way. Anonymity in business had served me well, allowing me to make deals without the complications that came with being known as a wealthy widow. I operated through various LLCs, and most people in the industry knew me only as M. Rosetti, a mysterious investor who always paid cash and closed deals quickly. That Thursday morning, I decided it was time to get a professional opinion on my home's value. I had been watching the market carefully, and I knew my property was worth significantly more than what I had paid for it 15 years earlier. The neighborhood had exploded in value, with tech companies moving to Orlando and driving up demand for luxury housing. I called Keller Williams, one of the largest real estate firms in the area, and asked for an agent to come by for a consultation. I specifically didn't mention my name or give any details beyond the address. I wanted an honest assessment without any preconceptions. They scheduled someone named Steph Morrison for Friday afternoon. I spent Thursday evening preparing, choosing my outfit carefully, a deep burgundy dress with a plunging neckline that showed off the vintage Italian gold necklace Marco had given me for our 20th anniversary. My black hair, now elegantly streaked with silver, was styled in loose waves that framed my face. At 65, I had learned that confidence was the best accessory, and I felt good about myself. Steph Morrison arrived at exactly 2 p.m. on Friday, driving a shiny BMW that screamed young agent trying too hard. He was everything I had expected from his voice on the phone: mid-20s, perfectly styled hair, expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and an air of cocky confidence that immediately put me on edge. When I opened the door, I watched his eyes do a quick scan, taking in my appearance, my age, my neighborhood, and clearly making assumptions about what kind of client I would be. His smile was professionally charming, but had an undertone of condescension that made my skin crawl. "Mrs.?" he asked, pulling out his phone to check his notes. "Rosetti, Mandy Rosetti," I said, extending my hand with the firm grip that had served me well in countless business negotiations. "Beautiful home," he said, glancing around the foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier. "Italian design influence?" "My late husband and I designed it together," I replied, noting how his expression softened slightly at the mention of my widowhood. I had seen that look before. The way some men's eyes lit up when they realized they were dealing with a woman who was both alone and potentially vulnerable. "I'm sorry for your loss," Steph said, his voice taking on a tone that was meant to be comforting but came across as practiced. "It must be difficult maintaining a property this size by yourself." "I manage," I said simply, leading him into the living room. As we walked through the house, I watched Steph work. He was clearly experienced at this, asking the right questions, taking notes on his tablet, measuring rooms with a laser device that beeped softly as he worked. But I also noticed other things. The way he lingered in the master bedroom, commenting on how lonely it must be sleeping in such a large space by myself, and the way his eyes kept drifting to my neckline when he thought I wasn't looking. "The house is beautiful," he said as we finished the tour in the kitchen, "but I have to be honest with you, Mrs. Rosetti. The market for homes this size is pretty limited right now. Most buyers are looking for something more manageable." "What do you think it's worth?" I asked directly. Steph pulled out his tablet and made a show of consulting various screens and data points. "Well, given the current market conditions, the size of the property, and the maintenance costs a buyer would be looking at, I'd say we're looking at somewhere in the $650,000 to $700,000 range." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was calculating. I knew for a fact that 3 comparable homes in my neighborhood had sold in the past 6 months for between $1.1 million and $1.3 million. Steph was lowballing me by almost half. "That seems conservative," I said carefully. "I know it's not what you want to hear," Steph said, his voice taking on that fake sympathy tone again. "But I've been doing this for 5 years, and I know this market inside and out. Trust me, in a house this size, with the current economy, we need to price aggressively to get any interest at all." 5 years. This child had been selling real estate for 5 years and was trying to convince me I didn't understand a market I had been investing in since before he was born. As we sat at my kitchen island going over the paperwork he had prepared, Steph's behavior became increasingly inappropriate. He had positioned himself closer to me than necessary, and I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with what I was beginning to recognize as the scent of desperation and greed. "You know, Mrs. Rosetti," he said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a charming tone, "I hate to see a beautiful woman like yourself dealing with all this stress alone." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, curious to see where this was going. "I mean, selling a house is a big decision, especially for someone in your situation. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of negotiations. You need someone you can trust to guide you through the process." "That's why I called a real estate agent," I said dryly. "Right, but I mean someone who really cares about your best interests." He leaned closer, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. "Maybe we could discuss this over dinner sometime. I know a great little Italian place. I bet you'd love it, given your heritage." There it was, the predatory behavior I had been expecting. He had assessed me as a lonely widow with a valuable asset and limited understanding of the market, and now he was moving in for the kill. The dinner invitation wasn't about romance. It was about getting me comfortable enough to sign whatever paperwork he put in front of me. "That's very kind," I said, maintaining my composure, "but I prefer to keep business and personal matters separate." Of course," Steph said quickly, clearly realizing he had overstepped but not ready to give up. "I just want to make sure you're getting the best possible service. Someone with your elegance deserves special attention." I stood up from the kitchen island and walked to the window, looking out at my perfectly manicured backyard. "Steph, let me ask you something. How long have you been working in Orlando real estate?" "5 years," he said proudly. "I was Rookie of the Year in my second year, and I've been one of the top producers in my office ever since." "And in those 5 years, what's the most expensive property you've sold?" He puffed up slightly. "I closed a $2.3 million deal last year, waterfront property, really exclusive." I turned back to face him. "That's impressive. What was the address?" "It was, well, I can't really share client information, but it was in the Bay Hill area." I nodded slowly. "Bay Hill is a nice area, very exclusive. Tell me, do you know who the seller was on that property?" "A private investor, someone who preferred to stay anonymous. We worked through their attorney most of the time." "Interesting," I said, walking back to the kitchen island. "And you never met this mysterious seller?" "No, like I said, it was all handled through legal representation. But the commission was fantastic, I can tell you that." I picked up the listing agreement he had prepared and read through it carefully. As expected, it was heavily weighted in his favor, with a commission structure that would net him almost $50,000 if he sold my house at his suggested price point. Steph, I said, setting the papers down, I think there's something you should know. What I didn't tell Steph was that I had spent the morning doing my own research on him. After our phone call the day before, I had looked up his track record, his sales history, and his reputation in the local real estate community. What I found was illuminating. Steph Morrison was indeed a successful agent, but his success came with a very specific pattern. He specialized in what the industry called distressed sellers, people who needed to sell quickly due to financial pressure, divorce, or death in the family. His strategy was to target vulnerable sellers, lowball their properties, and then flip the contracts to investors for significant markups. The $2.3 million sale he had bragged about was particularly interesting because I happened to know that property very well. I had sold it to him, or rather to his client, through one of my shell companies. The property had been listed for $1.8 million, and Steph had convinced the elderly seller to accept $1.6 million for a quick cash sale. 3 weeks later, it was back on the market for $2.3 million and sold within days. Steph had made his commission on both sides of the deal, and somewhere in the middle, an elderly woman had been cheating out of at least $400,000. But what really caught my attention was the pattern of his recent sales. In the past 18 months, Steph had closed on 7 properties where he had convinced elderly sellers to accept below-market offers. In each case, the properties had been quickly resold for substantial profits. I had also made some calls to colleagues in the real estate investment community. Steph Morrison had a reputation as someone who would deliver motivated sellers to investors willing to pay finder's fees. In other words, he was actively working to cheat his own clients out of money. Steph, I said, looking at him across my kitchen island, your offer is interesting, but I think you might be undervaluing my property. He leaned forward, his salesman instincts kicking in. Mrs. Rosetti, I understand it's emotional. This is your home, the place you shared with your husband, but we have to be realistic about market conditions. Let me show you something, I said, pulling out my tablet. I had prepared a detailed market analysis showing recent sales in my neighborhood, including the 3 comparable properties that had sold for over $1 million. Steph glanced at the data and waved it away dismissively. Those are outliers. Those buyers probably overpaid, or there were special circumstances. Trust me, I know what buyers are actually willing to spend. Do you? I asked, because according to my research, there are several investors in the Orlando market who specialize in luxury properties and pay above asking price for the right homes. Well, yes, there are some investors, but they're very selective, and they usually want to buy direct without paying real estate commissions. What if I told you I could connect you with some of these investors? Steph's eyes lit up with greed. You know investors? I might, I said carefully, but I'd need to know you're serious about getting me full market value for my property. Of course, if you can bring qualified buyers to the table, I'm happy to work with them. What kind of investors are we talking about? Commercial real estate, primarily. People who buy and hold properties for long-term appreciation. They typically pay cash and close quickly. That sounds perfect. Do you think you could make an introduction? I smiled. I think that can be arranged. But first, I want to understand more about how you work with investors. You mentioned earlier that you've worked with anonymous buyers before. Oh, yes, all the time. Some of the biggest deals in this market are done by investors who prefer to stay behind the scenes. It's actually easier to work with them because they don't get emotional about properties the way regular buyers do. And you don't mind not knowing who you're really working with? As long as the money's good and the deal closes, I don't care if I'm selling to a billionaire or a front company. Money is money. Perfect. He had just told me exactly what I needed to know. Steph, I appreciate you coming out today, I said, standing up to signal that our meeting was coming to an end. I'm going to think about everything you've told me. Of course, he said, also standing. But Mrs. Rosetti, I don't want you to overthink this. In my experience, when elderly sellers wait too long to make a decision, they end up losing money as the market shifts. Elderly sellers, I repeated. Is that a specialty of yours? Well, I wouldn't put it that way exactly, but I do have experience helping people in transition periods of their lives. Widows, retirees, people who are downsizing for health reasons. It takes a special kind of patience and understanding. I'm sure it does, I said, and I imagine these clients are particularly grateful for your guidance. They are. Just last month, I helped a 78-year-old woman sell her deceased husband's property. She was so overwhelmed by the process, so grateful to have someone she could trust to handle everything for her. How much did she get for the property? Well, I can't share specific numbers, but let's just say she was very happy with the result. Enough to move into a nice assisted living facility and still have money left over. I had heard enough. This man was a predator who specifically targeted vulnerable elderly people, convinced them to sell their properties for below-market prices, and then celebrated the fact that he had cheated them out of money they probably desperately needed. Before you go, I said, there's one more thing I'd like to discuss. Sure, what's that? I'm curious about your commission structure. How exactly do you get paid on these deals? Steph launched into an explanation of his fee structure, clearly excited about the potential payday. What he described was a complex system where he collected commissions from both buyers and sellers, often without the sellers understanding that they were paying both sides of the transaction. That seems like a lot of fees, I said. Well, you get what you pay for, Steph replied. Full-service representation, market expertise, negotiation skills. Most of my clients feel like it's the best money they've ever spent. I'm sure they do, I said dryly, especially the ones who don't understand what they're paying for. Steph was gathering his papers and preparing to leave when I decided it was time to end this charade. Steph, before you go, I have a confession to make. He looked up from his tablet with a smile that was probably meant to be charming. What's that? I haven't been entirely honest with you about who I am. What do you mean? I walked over to my home office and returned with a leather portfolio. Remember when you mentioned that $2.3 million sale in Bay Hill, the one with the anonymous seller? Yeah, what about it? I opened the portfolio and handed him a document. I was the seller. Steph's face went through a series of expressions as he read the paperwork: confusion, recognition, and then pure horror as he realized what I was showing him. You see, Steph, I am one of those mysterious investors you mentioned. In fact, I'm probably the biggest real estate investor you've never heard of. I handed him another document. This is a list of my commercial properties in Orlando. 37 buildings, including several that your agency represents. Steph's hands were shaking as he looked at the list. His face had gone pale, and I could see him calculating exactly how much money we were talking about. And this, I said, handing him a third document, is a summary of my residential investment portfolio. 43 properties, including the one you convinced Mrs. Henderson to sell for $400,000 below market value last spring. Mrs. Rosetti, my maiden name was Carlotta, I continued calmly. I've been investing in real estate since 1995. M. Rosetti Holdings, Carlotta Investment Properties, Sunshine Commercial LLC, those are all my companies. Steph was now looking at me like I was a completely different person, which, in a way, I was. The Bay Hill property you sold? I bought it specifically to test your ethics. I wanted to see if you would try to cheat an elderly seller the way you had been cheating other people. I never. You convinced Mrs. Henderson that her property was worth $1.6 million when comparable sales in the area were going for over $2 million. You then collected a commission from her and another fee from the buyer. Mrs. Henderson lost $400,000, and you made almost $80,000 in commissions and fees. Steph opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. And today, you tried to convince me that my property was worth $650,000 when recent sales in this neighborhood have been between $1.1 and $1.3 million. You were planning to cheat me out of at least $400,000. Mrs. Rosetti, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was yours, Steph. You assumed I was a lonely, desperate widow who didn't understand real estate. What you didn't realize is that I probably know more about the Orlando real estate market than anyone else in this city. I could see Steph's mind racing, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. His entire demeanor had changed. The cocky confidence was gone, replaced by panic and calculation. Mrs. Rosetti, I think we got off on the wrong foot here, he said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. I was being conservative with my estimates to protect you from disappointment, but if you have market data showing higher values, I'm happy to adjust my recommendations. Steph, let me ask you something. Do you remember what you said about elderly sellers? I'm not sure what you mean. You said they were grateful for your guidance. You talked about helping them through transition periods in their lives. You specifically mentioned a 78-year-old woman who was so overwhelmed that she was grateful to have someone she could trust. Steph was sweating now, and I could see him realizing that everything he had said was going to come back to haunt him. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, in the same calm tone I used in business negotiations. You're going to contact Mrs. Henderson and explain that you made an error in your market analysis of her property. You're going to refund your commission and help her understand that she sold her home for significantly less than it was worth. I can't do that. The sale closed months ago. Then you're going to write her a check for the difference out of your own pocket. That's impossible. Do you know how much money we're talking about? $400,000. The same amount you tried to steal from me today. Steph stood up abruptly, his professional mask finally slipping completely. You can't prove I did anything wrong. Market valuations are subjective. I gave my professional opinion. Actually, I can prove quite a lot, I said, pulling out my phone. I've been recording our entire conversation. You admitted to targeting elderly sellers specifically. You bragged about convincing vulnerable people to accept below-market offers. And you propositioned me for a dinner date as part of your sales strategy. Steph's face went from pale to red. You recorded me without my consent? Florida is a two-party consent state for private conversations, I said. But this is my home, and I informed you that I might be recording for my own records when you arrived. It was in the paperwork you didn't read before you signed it. I handed him a copy of the disclosure form he had signed without reading. But more importantly, Steph, you don't seem to understand the position you're in. I don't just own a lot of real estate in Orlando. I also know everyone in the industry. Lenders, investors, other agents, brokers, property managers. This is a relatively small community, and reputation matters. Steph was looking at me with a mixture of fear and hatred. I'm going to give you two choices, I continued. Option 1. You contact Mrs. Henderson and every other elderly client you've cheated over the past 2 years. You make restitution for your below-market deals, you change your business practices, and stop targeting vulnerable sellers. And option 2? Option 2 is that I make some phone calls. I share our recorded conversation with your broker. I share your sales history with the local real estate investment community. I make sure that everyone in Orlando knows exactly how Steph Morrison conducts business. The room was silent for a long moment as Steph processed what I was telling him. You can't blackmail me? I'm not blackmailing you, Steph. I'm offering you a choice between making things right and facing the consequences of your actions. What happens next is entirely up to you. Steph gathered his papers with shaking hands. I need to think about this. Take all the time you need, I said, walking him to the door. But Steph, Mrs. Henderson is 78 years old and living on a fixed income. The money you cheated her out of wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It was her financial security. After he left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back patio, looking out at the pool where Marco and I had spent so many happy evenings. I felt good about what I had done, but I also felt sad about what it revealed about the world we live in. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Mrs. Henderson. She was crying, but they were tears of relief and gratitude. Steph had contacted her, explained the situation, and written her a check for $400,000. She told me that the money would allow her to stay in her assisted living facility and provide the medical care she needed. Steph Morrison no longer works for Keller Williams. According to my sources in the real estate community, he has left Orlando entirely. His former broker was very interested in the recording of our conversation and conducted a review of all of Steph's recent transactions. 6 months later, I did end up selling my house, but not through a traditional real estate agent. I sold it directly to a young family for $1.2 million, exactly what it was worth. They were thrilled to get their dream home, and I was happy to know it would be filled with love and laughter again. I used part of the proceeds to establish a fund that provides free real estate consulting for elderly sellers. It's run by honest agents who specialize in protecting vulnerable clients rather than exploiting them. And the next time a young man in an expensive suit assumes I'm an easy mark because I'm an older woman living alone, I'll be ready for him too. Because predators like Steph Morrison rely on their victims staying silent and isolated. They count on people being too embarrassed or intimidated to fight back. But sometimes the person you're trying to cheat has more power than you realize. And sometimes the best revenge is simply making sure the truth comes to light. That's the end of my story. Have you ever dealt with a predatory salesperson who tried to take advantage of you? Share your experience in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. I share stories like this every day because everyone deserves to be treated with honesty and respect, regardless of their age or circumstances.